between himself and President Putin at 3:30 Eastern Standard Time. Trump once again reiterated his economic threats, as well as a desire to compromise. European leaders aim to drive Trump into a hardline anti-Putin stance, as Ukrainians are bearing sustained Russian attacks. Just hours before the Alaska summit, drone and missile strikes fell on eastern Ukraine, leading the Ukrainian president to accuse Putin of bargaining in bad faith. There are many who see the leader's aims as impossible to reconcile with one another, with Trump beholden to his allies, and Putin playing the part of modern-day warlord. Former Obama official Richard Stengel called the media's labeling of the ongoing conference journalistic hype, designed to glorify Trump's diplomatic acumen in a made-for-TV format. From WPFW and WBAI, I'm Noah Portner.
People who are dark up and blue, don't let us hang around this town and let what others say come true. We're just good for nothing. They all feel guilty. A boy's grown up.
Peace, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Darker Than Blue. If it's 5 o'clock on Friday, and it is August 15th, it's Friday today. It is 5 o'clock. That is time. That means it's time for Darker Than Blue, and that must mean I am Jackie Lukeman. Thank you so much for joining. I am so glad to see you all on this. I thought it was cooler, but it's not. It's humid. It's DC. It's summer in DC. And as you have heard from our news break before this show, a lot continues to go on in this world, in this country. A lot of it bad, at least what's coming from the empire, from the United States, and from Capitol Hill. But there's also a lot of resistance that is going on. And that part, the resistance part, the action of the people, what the people are doing to resist the fascism that is coalescing almost fully now, not just in the United States, but around the world. The ongoing militarism, the militarization of our streets here in DC, there is a serious and strong fight back going on there. And you won't hear about it, the fight back among the people, folks, if you pay attention only to corporate media. Because as I talked about a little earlier today on John Kane's show, Resistance Radio, there was a pretty nice sized rally last night in Franklin Square in Washington, D.C. And I know because I was there. And I was there because my comrades and a few member organizations who are members of the Black Alliance for Peace organized the event. We supported the event. Black Alliance for Peace DC did. Pan-African Community Action, a member organization of BAP, organized the event, along with Malcolm X grassroots movement, Diaspora Palante, Nodu Tall, all organizations, the African People's Socialist Party, ANWO, all organizations that are either member organizations of the Black Alliance for Peace or organizations that we collaborate with on a regular basis and all the time. It was a very nice rally that we had. And by nice, I mean it was well attended, not just by the organizers, but it was also given a lot of attention by just regular folks who were in the park, downtown DC. And the wonderful thing is, the one reliable, trustworthy media representation that we did have, we had independent media there. And for those of you who are followers, who are watching on Black Liberation Media, you may have seen the rally from Kim Brown's live stream, because she came down to DC to live stream the rally, which she showed on her platform, Burn It Down with Kim Brown. That's where you saw the rally live, also from some folks with some of the organizations who were streaming the rally. But if you watched corporate media, you wouldn't have known or heard or seen anything about it, because They didn't follow it. I don't remember seeing them there. And if they mentioned it on their broadcasts, I wouldn't know because I don't watch their broadcasts much anymore. The context was probably not accurate. So, if you want to hear about the ways that the people in the streets and the communities that are the most impacted by these policies, these moves by Trump, and the abandonment of responsibility to stand and fight him that has been carried out by Muriel Bowser, because she was in Martha's Vineyard. She left the city while this militarization of the police, the federalization of the DC police was rolled out and implemented in DC, as the checkpoint was attempted to be imposed in Columbia Circle, that the people fought back against and forced the military and the federalized police to dismantle their little checkpoint and go on about their business out of Columbia Heights. Yeah, she didn't even stay to stand with the people to stand up against this militarism. She went to Martha's Vineyard for whatever reason, and I don't care what the reason was, because if you are the mayor of a city that you say is under attack by a fascist white supremacist president, how are you leaving the city to go to a very wealthy enclave that was created, by the way, because they didn't want the blacks, even the rich blacks, to be anywhere near them? And now here we are, we thinking that we got it made so much that now we go to Martha's Vineyard because Obama and them are up there. But anyway, okay, that's a different. I'm sorry, I'm already off on an angry tangent, because what I did notice yesterday in the rally that was had was that there was representation from over probably 10 community organizations that represented almost every aspect of society in this city. There were immigrant organizations. There was No Du Tall, the Korean anti-imperialist organization. There was Diaspora Palante, the Puerto Rican anti-imperialist organization. There was the African People's Socialist Party, the African anti-imperialists, right? We had representatives from the LGBTQIA organizations and communities. We had representative from the faith community. I was there speaking on behalf of Reverend Grayland Hagler, who, of course, is the senior pastor emeritus of my church, Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ, but he's also a member of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, one of the oldest faith-centered peace organizations in the country, having been founded in 1917. So we did something that we have been working on doing, that we know we need to do. We are building a united front to fight against the coalescing fascism, but we understand that we're building this coalition on the idea that this fascism is not new. We say it's coalescing fascism because it's always been here. And I think this history, a little bit of my own personal history, I'm going to tell you a little bit about tonight, but the history of the denial of self-determination and respect and sovereignty of district residents in general, but of Black district residents in particular. I think it's important that we're talking about this history in the last week of pledge drive on this show, on my last show in this pledge drive, because next week we'll just be doing a regular show. But you do know that you can pledge anytime. You don't have to wait for a pledge drive to show support and to carry out your support for not just Darker Than Blue, but for WPFW. I think it's so critically important to talk about this history and this reality now, because of what I said when I began. You didn't hear about, I bet you did not hear about this rally last night in Franklin Square Park in Washington, D.C. I bet you didn't hear about the people forcing that checkpoint in Columbia Heights to be shut down and ran the National Guard and the federalized police out of Columbia Heights. I bet you didn't hear about the man, white man, worked for the DOJ, who was so frustrated with seeing the National Guards on the streets of DC. That man was walking home with his dinner. He had a sub sandwich. I'm not kidding. He was walking home. He sees a gaggle of militarized, whatever they were, National Guard, police, whomever, decked out in the military gear. This man is enraged. He confronts them. And he is basically telling them, how dare you? What are you doing here? We don't need you here. How dare you? And he's so frustrated that he throws his sandwich at one of them. His sandwich hits the man, hits him square in the chest. It's a sandwich, y'all. It wasn't like it was a missile. It was a sandwich. And they chase that man and arrest him. And he lost his job because he was a DOJ employee, but he stood for something. Did you hear about any of that? The people's resistance on the ground that's been going. Have you been hearing about that? In corporate media, has Fox News reported it? Has MSNBC reported it? While you're listening to what's his name, Morning Joe and Mika talk about how the military needed to be deployed to DC because of all the youth crime. Have you heard about the people standing up and protecting our neighborhoods and our people with whatever we have? No, you're not going to hear about that from them, because that would mess the narrative up, that we're a bunch of criminals and that crime is rampant in the streets and that the people of DC must want this help because, they must be so besieged by the criminal youth element too. WPFW is critical at this moment in time because we are where you are going to get the information about the fight back on the streets that the corporate media never wants you to hear about, because the corporate media has to maintain this narrative that the politicians put out about DC needing to be controlled by the federal government because local government can't control the criminal Black youth. That's what the narrative really is. But see, we here in Washington, D.C., we long-term residents and those of us who were born here. I'm not one of those who was born here, but I've lived here since I was 6 years old. But those of us who have been in this city either from birth or for that long, we understand that this kind of thing, this militarization of our streets, the criminalization of Black youth, the lies about the uncontrolled pathological violence of Black families and this isn't new. And deploying the National Guard to control the population, militarizing the police to control the population, having a law enforcement occupation of certain neighborhoods in this city is not new. But you're only going to hear this history and this connection to the present on shows like mine here on Darker Than Blue, because I lived it. And I'm going to tell you some of that in a few minutes, but also on this station in general, because most of the programmers here on Darker Than Blue are long-term DC residents, and they can tell you about the periods of violent police and military repression that we have lived through, and the continuing political denial of the self-determination and sovereignty of DC residents that we have lived under all of our lives here. So please, we've got a $500 goal here on Darker Than Blue. Not a lot. We've met it before. And those of you who have supported Darker Than Blue in this pledge drive before today, and you've helped me exceed my goal previously, thank you so much, especially you, Kim Brown's mama. Thank you. Mwah, mwah, mwah. I love you. But if you have not supported, if you listen to this show, you on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, who are watching Darker Than Blue and you normally watch through those platforms, please consider, don't consider, if you enjoy this program, knowing that it is broadcast on the radio, on an FM station that is publicly funded. We don't get money from NPR. We don't get money from the government. We are on the air because of you. Darker Than Blue is on WPFW because you want it to be on WPFW. And the only way WPFW remains on the air is if you continue to support WPFW staying on the air, being able to fund operating that tower that broadcasts this signal, being able to pay the very small number of salaries for the people who run the station, because the programmers are volunteers, y'all. We don't even get paid for this work. The money that we are asking for from you goes to maintain the operation of this station. And money doesn't come back into my pocket. I don't get it. Guess what? I don't want it, because this information is so important that I think it is my responsibility to be available for WPFW as long as they want me to be on this station and provide this information to you for free. I am not paid for doing this show, but WPFW has to remain on the air for us programmers to continue to show up and give you the information that we believe is critical to our very survival for free. So please, during the next, 40 minutes please call 202-588-9739 or 1-800-222-9739. If you don't want to call, you can go to the website, www.wpfwfm.org. Go to the drop down list, click on Darker Than Blue, select Darker Than Blue from that list, and then put in your pledge amount. If you don't want to go to the website, or if you're not able to go to the website right now, you're away from your computer, you have your phone in your hand, that's perfect. You can text your pledge to the number 801-801 by texting the letters WPFWFM to 801-801. Pledge your donation there. You can even Cash App your donation to WPFW, $WPFWFM. Put in your donation, $12.50 a month, automatically withdrawn from your credit card, your bank account, just $12.50 a month. That equals a $150 donation, a $150 pledge to WPFW. It is that simple. You can break up a pledge amount that seems insurmountable, $100, $150, $200, $250, into regular monthly installments that get automatically withdrawn until you say stop. Or for just a year, you decide which way you want to do it. And then to thank you, when you call, if you do this, when you call, become a sustaining member, that's what that is. When you call, please ask our volunteers who are answering the phone the thank you that we have for you for that $12.50 a month sustaining donation. So please keep WPFW on the air, because the information you are going to need to get involved in the fight back that we have to build to defeat this system, you are only going to get it here. And if WPFW goes off the air, then how are we going to organize and fight in this city to take back our streets? Because listen, you all, I have to explain to you, I think, why I'm so passionate about this particular issue of, the federal takeover of DC police. And I don't want people to think that I'm being dismissive of how dangerous this moment. It absolutely is. I do keep saying that, listen, what Trump is doing is not only not new, it is a continuation of the same kind of fascist repression using the police and using the military that we literally grew up in this city. So, and I know that people have kind of taken that as me dismissing the importance of what Trump is doing or dismissing the danger of what Trump is doing now. I'm certainly not. What I am saying is that this situation has been dangerous for some of us before Trump ever decided to run for anybody's office. And this is what we have been trying to tell people quite literally for decades about the way even liberals, even Democrats have governed when it came to working class and poor people in particular. So let me get into some of this history. So I used to live in what is now a very ritzy and upscale part of Washington, D.C., and that's DuPont Circle. Yup, is true. I used to live at 16th and R Streets Northwest with my guitar player boyfriend, who was the late Fred Freak Smith, formerly of Beefeater and Strange Boutique fame here in DC. Those of you who have lived in this city long enough and were anywhere near the punk scene in DC, you know who Beefeater was, you know who Strange Boutique was, and you know who Fred Smith was. So for those of you who don't know, I don't have enough time to explain it to you. That's why Google exists, for these mundane things that is okay for you to Google, so you won't be, deeply affected by the bad misinformation that you can sometimes get back from that ridiculous search engine. Okay, so the neighborhood DuPont Circle back then, and this was the late 80s, early 90s, I guess. Yeah. The neighborhood back then was bohemian. DuPont Circle was bohemian. It was full of punks, immigrants, working class folks, artists. It was great. It was a great neighborhood to live in at the time. But even like 30, 40 years ago, the neighborhood was already starting to change because the rents were starting to rise. Immigrants, working people, poor people were slowly being pushed out of DuPont Circle as wealthier, whiter folks moved in. And I, after breaking up with the boyfriend, moved back over to the neighborhood I'd grown up in since I was 6 years old, and that's Southeast DC. So at that time, I was making a few bucks over minimum wage. And at the time, minimum wage in the US, it wasn't even $7 an hour. It was like $4 and some change. But so at the time, I was working at Tower Records and Video. I was a supervisor, right? And even with that little bit of money, tiny bit of money, I was able to afford a 1-bedroom apartment with a bay window in the living room and parquet wood floors throughout the apartment in Southeast DC. My rent was $470 a month. You heard me correctly. $470 a month. And utilities were included. Okay. And on a little bit of money I made at Tower, I was still able to pay my rent on time most of the time and feed myself and the cats, because I had 2 cats, and have a little bit of money left over for, beer on the weekends and a concert or two, right? This was around 1989 or 1990. This was around that time. So I lived in the neighborhood in Southeast when I moved out of away from DuPont Circle. I lived in the neighborhood I went to elementary and high school in for most of my formative years, with the exception of 2 years that I went to school in my hometown of Jarrett, Virginia. And that's a whole nother weird experience that I'm going to get into one day. But see, I grew up in Southeast DC with free concerts in the park between Parkland Place, where we lived when I was little, and Portland Street, which is now called Malcolm X Boulevard. We grew up watching the fireworks on the 4th of July from the on-ramp to 295, because we would walk down Portland Street or walk through the woods and go up onto the highway, go up onto 295 and watch the fireworks because you could see the monument in the entire mall from 295. My cousin Stefan and I, who's like a brother to me, he's my first cousin, we would walk from our apartment over to Lifts Market on Sundays to get the Sunday paper for our moms and snacks for ourselves, On Fridays, we would get fish from the Muslims who would come around selling fresh fish on Fridays wrapped in newspaper. I remember growing up with Mrs. Thomas, the retired neighbor lady down the street on Parkland Place, who would watch us kids play in the park after school. When I was in high school, I walked from where we lived on Oakwood Street to Ballou Senior High School nearly every day. And 2 days a week, I walked to school in my Air Force Junior ROTC uniform because I was in Air Force Junior ROTC at Ballou. Yeah, I know. I volunteered at the Boys and Girls Club that used to be on Milwaukee Avenue over here in Southeast, that used to be next to where the Safeway was. And if you remember where the Safeway was, the Safeway used to be where there is a charter school there now. And the charter school is across from the main gate of St. Elizabeth's Hospital, right? And that is next to a car wash that has been there ever since I could remember. But next to the car wash is a place that used to be Players Lounge, which was a strip club that, yes, the former mayor, Marion Barry, mayor for life, you can't talk bad about him, but I can, used to frequent there because they also had really good food. And that's true because after Players Lounge stopped being a strip club, it remained a restaurant. And the food in is still good. Look, they've changed the name. I think it's called Gracie's Place. The food is still good. The food is still bomb. I still go there. Yes, I do. But that place is where the Safeway used to be. And in front of the Safeway used to be a McDonald's. That's where I grew up. This is my neighborhood. I grew up here in Southeast DC, where I'm sitting right now in the studio in my house. It's not far from all of that. So I even went to IHOP. For those of you who grew up in this area, remember how after all of the school functions, all of the dances, the proms, everybody used to go to the IHOP on St. Barnabas Road in Maryland, right across the Maryland line after, the ROT dances and the proms and that kind of stuff. I did the same thing. And I watched my mom and my aunt grow more and more protective of me and my cousin as crack turned our neighborhood from a place where we kids really loved growing up and running amok and having a great time, running through the woods, in the summer, leaving the house in the morning after breakfast and being outside and staying outside all day long until the street lights came on in the summer. And we were just running around in the neighborhood, having a great time, not being afraid of or worried about anything. And growing up in a neighborhood like that, and then watching the neighborhood turn into this very frightening place to live in because of what we thought at the time was just crack. But as I learned later, and as I listened to my elders in the neighborhood, it was more than that. But basically, y'all, I was your typical teenager in Southeast DC growing up, watching my neighborhood change from this beautiful place that I had nothing but great memories as a kid, not even realizing that we were poor, right? Having so much fun as a kid that I didn't even realize that we were poor. And watching my neighborhood change in ways that I didn't understand, but I knew I didn't like. Right. So what did we do? My mom and I joined the Neighborhood Watch Orange Hat Patrol on Oakwood Street, where we lived with our neighbors. And we went to monthly meetings with the 7th District Police. We did. They had a meeting with the community every month. And we were there, the little Orange Hat Patrol on Oakwood Street. We were there. I think there were maybe 6 or 7 of us, including my mom and myself. And we would be in these meetings every month, and those meetings would be packed to the brim down at, sometimes they would have them at 7D at the 7th District headquarters, and sometimes they would have them at the community center, at the Boys and Girls Club. They used to be on Milwaukee Avenue, and every single one of those meetings was packed with people from the neighborhood. People who were angry that St. Elizabeth's had let patients out during the day and that businesses were closing in our neighborhoods. And we had fewer and fewer places to shop, which meant that we had fewer and fewer places to work. And that after school programs were being shut down, summer youth jobs programs were cut back. All of that happened when the crack epidemic flooded our communities in a way we had never seen since, according to the older folks in my neighborhood, when they were talking about it as crack was happening, they had seen nothing like it since the post-Vietnam era and heroin, right? So our neighbors, especially older folks, knew doggone well that there was a lot of drugs all around all of a sudden, but there was just as quickly nothing else for us as a response or an alternative. So all of those years that my mama and I spent in our neighborhood watch group, and we did spend like 2 or 3 years, I was exposed to the reality of policing in Black neighborhoods. Even though I didn't fully understand that it wasn't like a personal hatred kind of thing, I didn't, even though it felt like it at the time. Right? So here's what I mean. We in the Orange Hat Patrol, the neighborhood watch, we would sit on the corner in our neighborhood, a major corner, a big old intersection, or we would walk through the neighborhood, noting the endless line of cars coming through our previously quiet back streets, looking for drugs, prostitutes, or both. See, we lived in a part of the neighborhood where if you didn't know those streets were back there, you really had no reason to be back there unless you were like really tragically lost, right? So our neighborhood was very, very quiet, with the exception of kids outside playing. Our neighborhoods were so quiet because we were really kind of off the beaten path, almost isolated. We were not on the main drag. But we started seeing all of just this endless line of people. And we started noticing the vast majority, almost all of those people were white. So then we started taking down the license plate numbers of all of the white suburbanites who came to the hood to cop their illicit entertainment, either the drugs or the prostitutes. And might I say, before this time, I had only seen prostitutes on television. I'm not kidding. I'm seriously not kidding. Like, I was still in high school, and I think when crack happened, I had maybe just started high school, because I seem to remember coming back from a summer at my grandma's in Jarrett, Virginia, because all the Black folks do this in every neighborhood, in every major city where our people relocated to northern cities during the Great Migration, fleeing racist terrorism, right? So most Black folks in most major cities all along the Eastern Seaboard and a lot of places in the Midwest would send their children back home down the country to the South, to whatever southern state they came from during the summer. That's what that was. So our parents needed a break from us. So they would send us back down to grandma and them so we could run around on the farm smelling like polecats, like my grandma would say. So I remember coming back and riding down the street in my mom's yellow and black Hornet, because she had just gotten that car, and stopping at the stop sign at the intersection in our neighborhood and seeing people that I went to high school with swarming the car, and I didn't know why, right? Because this wasn't happening when we left that summer. It wasn't like this. And then I remember seeing girls that I was in high school with, or that I was in middle school with, girls that I was in school with, like kind of hanging out on the corner, but not quite looking right. And I had never experienced anything like this before in my life. I didn't know what I was looking at. I didn't know what this phenomenon was. I was afraid, and I'm sitting in this car watching these people swarm in the car, like with this level of desperation that I really didn't understand, asking my mom, what the heck is going on? And my mother is driving the car, and she's just like, look straight ahead, look straight ahead, look straight ahead. Don't say anything, look straight ahead. And man, that was the shortest stop at that stop sign. And that woman burned rubber to get across that street in a way I had never seen her drive before. So we get in the apartment. I'm like, Mom, what is going on? And she kind of explains to me that things are different in the community, but she doesn't really have to have the words to explain why or what it is. She just said, you can't walk to school anymore. Because we were walking to middle school. We're not safe with you. You know, me and your Aunt Clara, we're not safe with you and Stefan walking to school anymore. And I'm like, what? Because, you know, walking to school was fun. That was where you had the most fun walking to and from school. Right? And I'm like, what do you mean? I can't walk to school? That's crazy. I'm in high school. You can't keep me from walking to school. You know, so we had an argument about walking to school, and I did win that one. We got to walk to school as long as I walked with my cousin to school, as long as we didn't go alone. Right? But then she kind of tried to explain to me why the neighborhood was different. But of course, she didn't really have the language to explain it because she didn't really understand it. Nobody really did. All we knew was there was this new drug. I think they call it crack. It is horrible. And it's making people do things that are really, I've never seen anything like this before. So we just have to really be careful. And a lot of people are getting caught up in it. And we don't even know what the heck is going on. So as this is unfolding, and I'm going to high school and I'm seeing things like, I think I remember like my first day of high school, I walk into Baloo. Actually, no, this wasn't my first day of high school. This was the first day of my sophomore year. I had already done ninth grade. That's what it was. Yeah. It was the first day of my sophomore year. I was in the 10th grade and I walk into school. And for the first time since I had been going to Baloo, I had already done ninth grade at Baloo. For the first time, there were pregnant girls. And it's not that I had never seen pregnant teenagers. Of course I had, but not in school. Now, there's a whole nother conversation about the way we have dealt with teenage pregnancy in our communities that we should be ashamed of, but that's another conversation for another day. But for the purposes of this conversation, me going to Baloo and seeing more than a handful of girls who were pregnant walking down the halls was unusual. It was so unusual that I went to the payphone to call my mother at work and tell her, Mama, I don't know what's going on, but I just saw, like before lunch, 6 or 7 pregnant girls. And of course, for my mom, that freaks her out even more because having a baby before you're ready is like the one thing my mom was like, please don't do it, please don't do it, please don't do it. You know, if it happens, of course I'm here for you, but please avoid it at all costs because you should just enjoy being a child, and having a child is enough of a responsibility, and a responsibility like that for a child, you don't need that right now. So just be a child, right? So my mom, of course, freaks out, and she's starting to put the impact of this crack thing together. And she's starting to realize that kids are doing just, you know, what kids do. High school kids are doing what high school kids do. They party, they experiment. Sometimes, you know, you might go to a party, you might try this, you might try that. And that's where you kind of decide, I don't like any of that stuff. I'm not doing it. And in the process of just kind of being kids, they don't realize that they're addicted now. And that didn't happen to everybody, but it happened to enough people that it became a problem. And it became a problem very, very fast. There are reasons for that. And that's also another conversation for another show. But I would welcome you to go to Black Liberation Media or Lukman Nation and look at 2 shows that I did after the tragic and unfortunate and untimely death of my late husband, where I do talk about why addiction to certain drugs is harder to treat than addiction to other drugs, and why treatment for those particular drugs that are harder to treat has been denied us, and why it is a conscious decision that is still being made by the medical community and what I started calling the recovery industrial complex in this country. Those two shows are called Diary from the Life of a Black Man, parts 1 and 2. And I encourage you to watch them, because there's a lot of science behind the addiction to crack and the addiction to meth and the addiction to heroin when you smoke it that we don't understand, that creates the conditions that we were so terrified of. But this is the reality I grew up with. This is literally my childhood in Washington, D.C. I grew up as a happy, pretty much oblivious kid to anything political. And I was confronted with a political reality of how a community and the people are impacted by politics, right? So this is what we experienced that led us to be participants in the Neighborhood Watch program, because we were fighting for our neighborhoods. We were fighting for our families. And we made it clear that despite however we felt about these kids who had become addicts, these young girls who had become addicts and they were selling their bodies to sustain their addiction, we were fighting for them too, because we understood that they needed help. They needed help more than anybody else, right? So we decided to fight for our people, and that's what we did. That's why we joined the Neighborhood Watch, the Orange Hats. So in the process of fighting for our people and trying to find a solution, we recognize this phenomenon of the people coming into our neighborhoods to buy the drugs were mostly white. So we noticed this, and we decide to take down the license plates of all of these thousands, and I do mean thousands, if not tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of cars, endless numbers of cars from DC, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Delaware, coming into our little neighborhood, a back street at the end of a side street off the main drag. We took down the license plates of all of these people because we were horrified at the sheer volume of cars that we saw find their way to our little neighborhood at the end of the street that was off a main street, right? The only way you knew we were even back there is if you lived there, someone invited you to visit, you were legit lost, or you were looking for exactly why those people came. So yes, we took down the license plate numbers of these people and notebooks, multiple notebooks of license plate numbers from other states. And we took those notebooks to these meetings that we had with the police at 7th District. And I will never forget that in one of these meetings, the lieutenant at the time told us that there was nothing that could or would be done with those license plate numbers. In fact, I remember the lieutenant at the time looking at me and the notebook I showed him like the notebook was an alien artifact and like I had 3 heads. It was probably that experience. That was my first experience that I can really remember of being disrespected and dismissed by someone in authority outside of a teacher, because that was kind of common, right? But in these meetings that we had, the neighborhood, the community had with the police, we asked for help in keeping those people out of our neighborhoods. And we also asked politicians for help to keep our kids out of the crack game, to restore all the things that were taken from our communities that provided us some small measure of economic stability, or at least creative outlet for our kids. But the police that are today used to keep us out of the nice white affluent neighborhoods, well, they told us back then that the white folks from Maryland, from Virginia, from Pennsylvania, from Delaware, they were free to roam our neighborhoods for whatever they wanted, and they weren't going to do anything about it. And I'm pretty sure that is when I began looking at the police very differently. from this experience that I'm telling you about, because I didn't trust the police anymore after that, because it was clear to me that they didn't care about us at all. All this stuff about protect and serve, I realized from that experience that it was a lie. But what I didn't know then, and what many people didn't entirely understand, was that by far the most significant factor in what fueled the crack epidemic that no one ever talks about, even today, was the poverty imposed on our communities during the Reagan administration. Because, see, while the nation went on an ideological rampage in demonizing the entire Black and Chicano and other hard hit poor communities for the rampant violence and the social collapse caused by the crack epidemic, or that they blamed on the crack epidemic, almost no one placed the blame where it really belonged, with US government policy that set us up to be even more deeply exploited than we already were. And this is where the history, the political history that we also lived, comes into play, that is incredibly important. That, again, you're not going to get this anywhere else. What other show are you going to listen to on what other radio station in this country, in this city, where they're going to tell you about not just the history of police repression that someone lived through and that many people still live through, it, that they need to fess up to if they were honest, but also talk about the history of denial of sovereignty and self-determination that has always been the issue with the District of Columbia since it has existed. You're not going to hear that anywhere else other than on Darker Than Blue, I would dare say. And I know you're not going to hear it anywhere else other than on WPFW. And several of you have already shown how much you appreciate hearing this information. Thank you, Anonymous from Hyattsville, Anonymous from Somerville, Mr. Griss from Potomac. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. This means that our goal is now down from $240. Now the goal, I'm sorry, from $500. Now the goal is $240. And that's because of you all. We can keep it going. Let us continue to keep WPFW on the air. Help me meet and exceed my $500 goal. Now it's a $240 goal. 202-588-9739 or 1-800-222-9739. Cash App $WPFWFM. Text WPFWFM to the number 801-801. On the web, WPFWFM.org. Select Darker Than Blue from the drop-down menu. Let me tell you what Jimmy Carter did that factors into this, which is a good thing. It was a good thing. I'm not going to dunk on Jimmy Carter this time. I know y'all are mad at me still from the last time. Okay, but this time, this thing that Jimmy Carter tried to do was one of the good things that he tried to do, because in 1980, he signed the Mental Health Systems Act, which was part of an effort to improve community-based mental health services and reduce the stigma toward mental health needs that was largely pushed by his wife, Rosalind Carter. Carter's bill was supposed to provide funding to community mental health care providers. And he wanted to do that to improve cooperation between federal, state, and local agencies, and to provide better and more targeted and relevant care for people in the community from community level services that were best equipped to help people, where federally funded mental health institutions would then be more focused on treating people with conditions that designated them as threats to the public, because those people needed to be confined, right? Like people who had, violent mental health issues. So that's what Carter's bill was intending to do, which was a good thing. It was a part of this deinstitutionalization effort to move all mental health care out of these massive institutions, which did not provide people who didn't have serious, violent mental health issues the kind of specialized and targeted care that they needed, to provide better mental health care to people. But the very next year, Ronald Reagan repealed Carter's bill in the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1981, and Reagan established block grants for the states to provide mental health care, which they did not do. Not at the levels that were adequate to meet the need. The states did not allocate those block grant funds to the community level programs that existed that Carter's legislation intended to fund. And the people who desperately needed those services had nowhere to go to get them. Why didn't they have anywhere to go? Because Reagan also defunded federally funded mental health facilities across the country. So these institutions like St. Elizabeth's here in Washington, D.C., Bellevue in New York, I can't remember the institution in Los Angeles, but it's enormous. That one, they suddenly had no money to continue to house and feed nonviolent patients. So they had to let them out during the day, hoping that they would come back for their medication later. And of course they didn't. So what happened? Homelessness rose dramatically in those cities that were affected by Reagan's budget cuts to the federal mental health institutions' budgets, as did low-level petty crime like shoplifting. As an example, in my neighborhood where St. Elizabeth's Hospital is, I saw businesses like our neighborhood McDonald's, where a lot of the senior citizens used to gather for coffee and a chat, and the Safeway, where we all shopped. I saw those businesses close and every other business close as a result of the rise in petty crime committed by mentally unstable and untreated people who were now left to their own devices in the neighborhood with literally nowhere else to go because St. Elizabeth's could no longer afford to house them or feed them during the day. They had nowhere to go. They had no jobs. They had no homes, no way to take care of themselves. So at the same time that he did that, Reagan also gutted the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, or CETA, which provided vocational training and federally subsidized jobs in many disadvantaged communities. This act, CETA, was signed into law by Richard Nixon. I hate to give him credit, but it's true, he did. And he did that as a response to the 1973-1975 recession that he was responsible for. But CETA provided over 750,000 federally subsidized jobs by 1978. A large component of the program was summer youth employment. This is important because I was a part of that program. And so was Mr. Abdishahid Mohammed Lukman, who was called Mike Johnson at the time, but he lived in Camden, New Jersey. That's my late husband. And he participated in the summer jobs programs through the CETA program also. So this program, implemented by Richard Nixon, really did touch the lives of a lot of working class and poor Black and Chicano and other oppressed people. But Reagan replaced the publicly subsidized training and jobs program with a program that subsidized private sector businesses to train people from disadvantaged communities for private sector employment. Yes, Reagan gave businesses money, private businesses, not the government, money to train a handful of poor kids for 2 summer jobs working in the mailroom. That's what it amounted to. And most didn't even do the bare minimum. They just kept the money. So right along with the rise in homelessness and petty crime from the defunding of federal mental health, unemployment also rose. Youth unemployment also rose under Reagan, along with unemployment in these communities that CETA programs provided employment for. Then crack cocaine happened. It was after all of that crack cocaine flooded our neighborhood. It was after all of that we were destabilized from the economic policies imposed by the Reagan administration that made it almost impossible for us to fight off the scourge that crack was. We didn't understand all of those moving pieces at the time, but when we had the opportunity to demand of our alleged elected officials to help us fight this thing that we had never seen before, this crack epidemic, we knew the things that we needed that would provide us the tools that we needed to fight. It was all of the things that the government had taken away: the summer youth employment program, mental health funding, drug program funding, school programs, after school programs for our kids. We demanded those things from the politicians. We demanded those things. And what we got instead were the National Guard deployed to our neighborhoods with those big, enormous, bright spotlights. The Klieg lights is what they call them, I think. And we got militarized police. We got more police. We got militarized police. And now we have police on every corner in our neighborhoods, and all under the same excuse of combating crime. So here we are talking about a federal takeover of MPD, of Metropolitan Police, and the deployment of the National Guard, the militarization of our police, the occupation of DC. And I am here to tell you, as a 56-year-old, I can't remember how old I am anymore. Things are moving that fast. As somebody who has lived in DC since 6 years old and grew up in a neighborhood where the National Guard was deployed in our communities, I am here to tell you that this ain't new. And I'm not saying that because I hate the Democrats in particularly more than I hate the Republicans. I am saying that because the entire system has supported this type of engagement between the state and the people. This occupation of the streets of working class and poor people in DC, this is not only not new, this is how we have always been treated by those in power who want to keep us under their control so they can continue to exploit us as a resource, so that they can continue to control us and never allow us to control our own resources. Because when we do, dear listeners, we will be able to provide ourselves with what we need to protect ourselves. We will keep us safe. The only way you understand that we have the power to do this is if you hear from someone who has lived it, that we knew this is what we needed all along. We fought for it, we demanded, and this is what we got instead. So we must continue that fight. We must continue the fight for our own sovereignty and self-determination. And the only way we can do it is if we are organized. So let's do that, ladies and gentlemen. Let's tell the truth about the history of this city, the history that we've lived, the long history of oppression that we have endured. And for once, for those of you who have not experienced that, for once, why don't you all listen to those of us who have lived it and follow our lead? That way, we'll get free. That's all the time I have for Darker Than Blue. Thank you so much for joining. As usual, Alu to continua, the struggle continues. But if you keep listening, if you keep following the history, and if you keep organizing for liberation, Victoria asserta, victory is certain. Peace, y'all. Thanks so much, y'all. Appreciate you. Very busy weekend, a lot going on. There's so much more to the legislative history that I wanted to get into about DC, but I just didn't have time. I will pick that up next week. I just want to announce to you all that in a few months, Blackonomically Speaking will be back. Yay, I'm so excited. Dr. Linwood Tawhid is excited to join us again. He is just engaging in a couple of projects that he has to complete. And then he will be back with us in about 3 or 4 months. So it's going to be a little bit, but I'm telling you it's coming. I'm just really excited to be able to announce that because there is so much economic bullshit that we have to get straight, and he is the only person I trust to do it. So thanks so much, y'all, for everything. Thank you all for those of you who watched the live stream of the PACA BAP coalition rally from Franklin Square Park in DC yesterday. We will be in Baltimore tomorrow. So if you are in Baltimore tomorrow at 12:30, please get yourself to Payne Memorial AME Church for the BAP Baltimore teach-in. And let me find the flyer. Nope, not entirely prepared, because you know how I do. Good Lord. I can never quite be perfectly prepared, can I? No, because something always happens. And I'm always forgetting one thing or another. And now, of course, I can't find it. Now I can't find it. Oh, look at that very old video that somebody put up there. But the BAP Baltimore teach-in tomorrow, good grief, where is it? Now I cannot find it because I want it. There it is, Political Prisoners in the Age of Empire. I did not want to mess the title up because I was gonna. So let me share it. And I recognize I had to not share. I had to stop sharing my Zoom screen there. So you don't get the pretty background. Sorry about that. But for the teach-in in Baltimore tomorrow, there we go. Whew, goodness gracious. That just took forever, didn't it? Payne Memorial AME Church. Political Prisoners in the Age of Empire, commemorating Black August. From local jails to global detention. Tomorrow, August 16th, doors open at 12:30. The event ends at 3. Payne Memorial AME Church, 1714 Madison Avenue. Come out tomorrow if you're in the Baltimore area. That Baltimore will be there. I will be there. You should be there. Stay tuned for everything that comes next, because everything is going to have to come next if we're going to have to win. Now is not the time to us to be sitting on our hands, pontificating about anything. Now is the time for us to get up off our asses and do the work of organizing that we must do in order to build the mass movement that we must have in order to defeat this system so that we all can be free. All right, that's it for me. Peace.